So we did a couple things this weekend. I did a pine tree class for people who bought the book and members of the rug cooking journey. That was several hours on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we did a graphic lesson. We got kind of mired down in a problem with graphic, but it was a good thing because we solved it. We know exactly what it is, so that'll be added to the course. So if you are ever in that in that same boat, you will be able to solve that same problem. So that's a good thing, right? Because otherwise I don't know what the problem is. So thanks to some persistence on the part of Donna, who's here today in the Zoom room. Thanks, Donna. We solved that mystery once and for all. I will be shooting a video on that, and I'm going to create a new section in the graphics course called troubleshooting. And that's where that little tidbit of information will go, because I will not remember that by next year. So, and it's one of those things that you'll never have to deal with until you do. You know, it's one of those problems that is not a real problem unless you've made some changes in the settings. But once you've made those changes, you don't know what it affects, so you forget to turn it back. And that's what happened, and we've got the solution for that. So that's the best part. So if you have questions today. Okay, so from Pat Donner, I haven't read all of this, but fingers crossed. She says, the other day you mentioned hooking with mottled over-dyed wool. This type of wool seems to be readily available now, possibly due to the lack of textures out there. I've been hooking for about 3 years and have always wondered about hooking with mottled splotchy wool. You mentioned pulling up a loop until you get the color you need for the area being hooked. I get it, but it sure seems like this mottled wool could be wasteful or a pain in the butt. Yes. But further on, she goes, I'm wondering if you had addressed this, since it seems our wool choices are going down this avenue. Well, yeah, we're talking about what feels to me like an extreme absence of textured wool. We've got some textures out there, sure, but for the bulk of them, what I'm seeing offered by most of the wholesalers tends to look more like a over-dyed neutral rather than a true texture. To me, a texture has a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red, maybe some blue, right? When you over-dye a texture, it's varying values of that one color. And I guess I almost draw the line at calling those textures. Mainly because I think your better bet is to buy the underlying wool in neutral and then having it sit around and then dye it any color you want. I don't quite get the logic in that unless it's a saving thing. And I'm hoping maybe one of the vendors will see this and maybe set me straight. But I really miss the days when we had plaids with big bands of color and even little bands of color, because I know swatching is difficult on a big repeat. But the mottled wool, to me, depending on how it's mottled, generally hooks up as a solid. It really doesn't fall in the category of texture for me. When I was talking about pulling up a big loop, that had to do with a particular student's application where the mottled wool that they had went all the way from almost white to a very dark. And because there was such a wide variance, which normally you could use that to hook grass or whatever, but they were wanting to hook it as part of the pine tree. And specifically, I think it was the dark. She wanted to use the dark in that. So she could hook it with dark, but if it started turning light, she would have to pull up a big loop to get past the light spot to get back to the dark. Because when you're trying to do shading, mottled wool just doesn't work. Mottled wool can be very difficult to do shading on, because in shading we rely on very carefully placing the values in a certain order to create the shape. If you have mottled wool, those values are going to pop up all over the place. So if you're hooking just a motif and you're just hooking it with the one wool and you're filling it in, mottled wool is fine for that. It's not good for trying to shade, and it's not a substitute, in my opinion, for a textured wool. Now, one of the teachers who I know loves textures is sort of the queen of primitive rug hooking, Barbara Carroll. She doesn't consider spot dyed wool a texture, and I'm with her on that.
I was wondering, with the example of the pine tree where someone wanted to hook with the dark green and the white was showing up, and you pull up the white, do you just cut off the white and then throw that in your stash and use it someplace else? And is that what you're saying?
That's what I was saying. If that's the wool you absolutely want to use, I don't recommend using it. So then that's off, pulling up that big loop is a method that you use with dip dyes usually when you want to get to the lighter tip a little bit faster. Because when you have a dip dye, it's the same, it goes from dark to light in one strip, but it does that equally across all your strips, right? And maybe what you're hooking is you're hooking it and it works fine for the long part, but then on the short part, you need to get into the lighter area a little bit faster. So you'll have to pull up a big loop and cut that off. And yes, you have a lot of extra tails. It's not a good look. So depending on what you're doing, sometimes a gradation swatch is the best bet. Sometimes the dip dye will work. Sometimes you can take the dip dye and literally cut it sideways so that every strip is one value, and then use that as a swatch. That's a trick that I use for my realistically dyed sky. So I take that sky wool, and instead of cutting it the way you would normally cut a dip dye, I cut it in the opposite direction. So I have a dark strip, a little bit lighter strip, a much lighter strip, and then a very light strip. And then I use that to hook the sky. I don't take that dip dye and try to hook it straight up and down. Never, ever, ever, ever hook a sky straight up and down. Okay, unless you're trying to make people feel awkward, because that's what it'll do. It'll never look like a natural looking sky. But if you follow my method for the sky, then that will actually make a very realistic, almost a sky that you don't pay attention to, because it goes right into the background, almost completely disappears because it looks so right. And if you bought the Pine Trees, Grass, and Sky book, guess what lesson's going to be coming up next in a few months? It's going to be a sky lesson, and we'll get through that. Oh, here's one from Laura. She said, how do you become a member? You become a member. Let me type it into, you go to howtorughook.com, and I'll give you the link specifically for just the membership, not the courses. And then I will give you the link. I keep type and talk at the same time. How to rug hook courses. And then the second link should go to the page where it has all the courses. It also has the membership. But if all you're interested in is a membership, that first link is going to be your best bet. The membership includes a lot of different things. This year it's going to include a lot of free live lessons that normally would only be available to people who are part of a different paid program. Like the Pine Tree lesson we did on Saturday was a free to live lesson for anyone who's a member of the Rug Cooking Journey. Anybody else had to buy version 6 of the book. Still a good bargain. And by the way, just a tidbit. If you're interested and you think, oh, I'll do that later, as soon as I get that course filled up, the price for the book and the course will be more expensive than it is right now because it's turning into a darn good course. So if you haven't bought the book, just an insider tidbit, might be a good time to go ahead and get it. And then the rug hooking journey is something that you pay for either month to month. You can do 6 months at a time, or you can do a year at a time. When you do a year or 6 months at a time, I give you a nice little price break. So you pay less. After 1 year of membership, you are offered the opportunity to become a VIP member. VIP member sounds like it's the box seats and it's more expensive. It's not. It's probably a bad name for them, but I treat you. You get some special offers that maybe regular members don't get. And you get a much lower yearly price. So that is something you'll want to look for. It tends to kick in at around 11 months, just as an insider tip. On your dashboard, you just click onto that and it'll transfer you into the VIP program. Okay. Kathleen is asking, let me grab this over here. Kathleen is asking, do you use wool strips and yarns together with a project? I'm new to this and unsure if I can use both. Absolutely, you can use both. There are many rug hookers who do only hooking with yarn because they have a big stash. They're ex-knitters, or they just have a more available yarn source, or they just like the way it feels because it's much thinner, so it's very easy to pull up. There's a lot of rug hookers who use yarn. I like mixing it. When you mix it, you get extra little textures. It's not appropriate in every rug, but you can experiment with it and find the places where it does work. All of the things that I teach in the rug hooking journey and in most of my courses would also pertain to yarn. You color plan exactly the same way when you're using yarn. You are going to be doing some of the dyeing the same way using yarn. Some slight little adjustments because you don't want to end up with a tangled mess at the end. But a lot of the same, you can make a pencil pouch with yarn. So all those courses are available for yarn rug hookers as well as wool strip hookers. Okay, and looking over the Zoom room, hi Noriko. I'm pointing you out mainly because Noriko goes to extreme measures to join us. She wakes up at 5 a.m. so she can join us because she's in Japan. So I appreciate you being here. And I know everybody else works hard to get there, but that's dedication. People on YouTube either don't have questions, got it all figured out, or can't figure out how to put in a comment. I haven't decided which. So I am going to go ahead and end it here on YouTube. And then I am going to jump in with members in the Zoom room, and we'll do our usual question and answers there, which will also then turn into the Rug Hooking Journey membership tune-up, which was scheduled today for 6 o'clock. There's no sense for us waiting until 6. We'll talk about the membership as we're going along. So if you're a brand new member and you're on the YouTube channel, you want to get over to the Zoom in the Tuesday office hours for that. So thank you, YouTube, for being here. I'm sorry I couldn't deliver the lesson that's promised in the title, but that'll be next week's video. And I will see you all then. And then now I've got to find my little thingy to end this. Okay, here we go.